Great. First of all, thanks for attending the session. I know it's late in the day, that too, when VMworld is almost about to close and you guys have a VMworld party that you guys need to go attend. This session is about SRM, or Site Recovery Manager, future product directions, with the specific emphasis on cloud-based disaster recovery. My name is Ashwin Kotian. I'm a senior product manager at VMware. I'm focused on BCDR, business continuity, disaster recovery, and for this session, I'm joined on stage by Craig McClellan. He is the Chief Technology Officer at hosting.com. And in essence, what we are going to cover in this session is a brief overview of SRM as it stands today, the product, its key mechanisms of how it enables disaster recovery. I'm going to touch upon briefly some of the new features that SRM 5 is enabling. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the general product directions that we are considering for this particular product. And cloud is a big portion of those directions, particularly because, private cloud, public cloud, customers, you guys, partners, pretty much the whole industry is looking at it. And since cloud is the next major phase that the IT industry is going through, we want to make sure that existing customers who have a DR strategy in place continue with that journey, right? As they move to the cloud, they have the same level of disaster recovery protection. And then I'm going to hand it off to Craig, who's actually going to talk about how hosting.com is using SRM 5 to offer disaster recovery as a service in their cloud. All right? I have some time budgets in here. Hopefully we stick to the time. We hopefully will have enough time for Q&A. But in the event that we get kicked out of this room, which we had to go through in the last session, please feel free to follow up with us on any questions you may have, either related to Cloud DR or what hosting.com services offer, or for that matter, any questions with regards to SRM or SRM5 as they stand today. All right. So for those of you who are not very familiar with Site Recovery Manager is essentially a DR orchestration product that basically builds on the core capabilities of vSphere. Right? vSphere enables high availability via VMware HA. It provides encapsulations of VMs, which makes it really easy to move virtual machines around. And in essence, what it does is it translates or converts your traditional manual runbooks that you have used in the past for DR, and it converts them into a centralized recovery plan or multiple recovery plans that you can choose to execute by a single click of a button. So in essence, whether it's about setting up a DR plan or running a DR plan, in the past you would have been probably exposed to weeks and weeks worth of effort, or for that matter, hours or maybe days worth of effort in terms of recovering your most critical workloads. And SRM, by virtue of its fully automated DR orchestration capabilities, is able to shrink that down to a matter of minutes. One of the most common use cases for SRM that our customers are using today is for DR testing. Obviously, you don't want to be in a situation where you ever have to face a disaster, right? The most common situation you would be engaging with this product on is essentially DR testing, to make sure that whenever the need arises, you want to make sure that you have an optimal DR plan ready to be triggered that is so foolproof that regardless of whatever changes are happening in your infrastructure, your DR plan is able to keep up with it. And SRM provides you that level of visibility and corrects any issues if at any given point in time it identifies a gap in that plan. All right? Disaster recovery, in essence, relies on two key elements. One is the aspect of moving your data from one site to the other site. So replication is one of the key aspects that SRM leverages. Today, it's primarily based on array-based replication, and I'll talk about some of the improvements on the replication side that SRM5 brings about. Once you have replicated your data from one site to the other side, the next aspect of disaster recovery is essentially orchestrating the recovery of the workloads that have been now replicated. So those are the key aspects of what a disaster recovery solution typically encompasses. And we have a large ecosystem of storage partners who have built SRAs, which stand for Storage Replication Adapters. We have about 28 SRAs, and that list keeps on growing. Just a quick overview of how the product works. Essentially, consider Site A as your protection site, Site B as your disaster site. Both of them running vSphere, managed by vCenter Server. And SRM essentially integrates with these layers of virtualization and basically communicates with the two SRM instances across the two sites. And in the event that there is a certain outage, either with the VM or if there is a network outage, a storage outage, whatever the situation may be that either vCenter Server picks up on, or maybe SRM picks up on because it notices something funky with the storage layer, there is going to be an alert in the SRM console. At that point, it's really up to the end user to take a look at that alert and try to translate that into whether this is a real issue that is potentially disastrous, right? Or is it an issue that is more intermittent, that may go away in a few minutes or a few hours. So disaster recovery is a decision, declaring a disaster is a decision that you, the owner of those applications, the owner of that infrastructure, needs to make. So in essence, if you are in a situation where you have declared a disaster, you essentially would hit, there is this big red button in SRM which says, trigger or execute your recovery plan. And that's the only thing you do. At that point, SRM steps into action, and if it's a true site outage, it basically breaks the replication between the two sites, presents the volumes, the storage volumes at the recovery sites to the ESX host, and from there on, it interacts with vCenter Server to power on all of those virtual machines in the order that has been prescribed in the recovery plan. Again, the recovery plan is very granular, very customizable. I'm not going to go into a lot of details around it. We have actually at least 3 or 4 sessions talking about SRM5 and SRM in general. And since the topic here is mostly about cloud-based disaster recovery, I'm going to focus on those elements. But as I said, if you have any if you're new to SRM and want to know more, please feel free to come and get me. So given that SRM is essentially a DR protection story for vSphere environments, where are we going from here on? One of the key elements that SRM has focused on is making DR simple. If you compare traditional DR and compare it with what SRM has enabled for DR, we have made disaster recovery very simplistic, very easy to deploy and manage. But today, SRM is operating at a VM layer. It's operating at an infrastructure layer. And we feel that SRM needs to be needs to abstract off the infrastructure, just because when you talk about disaster recovery, yes, you're trying to protect your infrastructure. But at the end of the day, you're trying to protect or provide for high availability for your most critical workloads, most critical services. Your services translate into applications, and your applications are being served by those virtual machines, right? So yes, we do cover the foundation of what enables those services, but in the true sense, we want to enable you to DR protect your services in a way that it's service level centric, it's application aware, such that it's fully automated, so that, in this example, if you were to protect an Exchange service, which is comprised of multiple VMs, all you need to do is enable DR, similar to how you enable HA, associated service level, and based on the service level, SRM is going to ensure that it gets provisioned on the right data stores, which are possibly replicated, and it's going to be associated with the right recovery plan based on what service level you chose. So that's the level of simplicity we want to enable. The second aspect is we want to make workloads really portable across sites. Not just from the context of disaster recovery, but also from the aspect of any sort of data center-related migration tasks you may want to do. It's a fact that 40% or greater than 40% of our customers today are using SRM for data center migration. So we have the core capabilities today that we can extend to enable you to move from not just one site to the other site, but also across multiple sites. You could have a star topology, you could have a cascaded DR topology, and your site could even be in the cloud. So we want it to be so flexible that 1:1 is not the only site boundaries that you operate in. So in essence, we want to take SRM from being a site recovery manager to being a site manager. A quick overview of what new features in SRM5 are. The most, I would say, the feature that has elicited a lot of interest and excitement is vSphere replication. vSphere replication is essentially per VM level replication that's enabled from the ESXi platform. It's only available via SRM, via Site Recovery Manager. It is an asynchronous mode of replication wherein you can configure an RPO, a recovery point objective of as low as 15 minutes, and you can dial it up all the way up to 24 hours. So it's very customizable. The key use cases we are actually addressing is one for customers who don't have any storage replication in place today. As I said earlier, SRM relies on array-based replication. And in most cases, you need like storage at both ends. So for our customers who do not have storage replication, they have been essentially blocked from doing disaster recovery. And that's one of the use cases we are trying to address here is to, as part of your disaster recovery solution, you get built-in replication, I guess, for free. For existing customers who have been using array-based replication, vSphere replication, even though it's asynchronous, it's a great tool or a great component to leverage for your DR needs, especially when you have different storage arrays at both sites. Because this goes across, this component is storage platform agnostic. All it understands is VMFS. So as long as you present a VMFS source and a VMFS destination, it's going to replicate across. Right? That's the beauty of what this component provides. Automated failback is something that we have improved upon, which essentially means that you can replay your recovery plans in the reverse direction. So when you fail over from site A to site B, you have the ability to go back from site B to site A. Plan migration is something which is a new workflow in SRM5 that enables you to address use cases such as either a planned migration around disaster avoidance or in the case of data center maintenance activities. In this case, what you end up with is application consistent state of VMs that are being moved around, because we go through a graceful set of steps in order to shut down the VMs at the protection site. Once the shutdown is facilitated, which means your VMs at the protection site or data at the protection site is application consistent, the storage is synced up between the two sites. Again, that means no data loss. You still have application consistency. We break the replication, present it at the other site, and we orchestrate the power on. So in all of this, you are assured that the VMs, when they are being recovered, they are application consistent. Then in general, there are a number of improvements around the UI. We have a new UI for IP customization. There are a bunch of new icons that help you differentiate between a regular VM, a DR-protected VM, or a shadow VM. And performance-wise, there is an improvement of anywhere from 6x to 10x improvements depending on which scenario you take into consideration. All right, so that's kind of like a quick overview of SRM5. Moving ahead, some of the key themes we are focusing on is driving the cost of DR on a per VM basis down. And vSphere replication helps enable some of that. The other aspect which I briefly touched upon is that a lot of our customers today cannot do DR because they don't have a secondary site. So we want to make sure that we enable them to be able to DR protect their mission critical workloads without needing to dedicate their own site. So this is where we enable our service providers, especially our cloud service providers, who want to offer DR as a service in the cloud. And that's the main topic of discussion today. And in essence, we also want to enable DR protection to extend beyond mission-critical apps. In terms of the future product directions, there are a number of areas we're looking at, some of which I already mentioned. I talked about Cloud DR, which we are going to discuss more. There is policy-based DR, which is related to the aspect of assigning service levels and letting it provision and deploy on the right data stores, depending on what kind of RPO, RTO service levels you have specified. Optimizing SRM for migration manager, DR for desktops. So as you can see, there are a number of different directions we are looking to take this product in. But in essence, for the next, I wouldn't say next major release, our primary focus is on cloud-based disaster recovery. What is that? When we talk about Cloud DR, we are primarily talking about two use cases. The first use case is about when you move your workloads into a cloud, you want the same level of disaster protection that you get today with vSphere. So in essence, we want to make sure that SRM, vCloud Director-based workloads have the same service levels delivered. There is also an element of, I would say, multi-tenancy. There are elements around self-serviceability. I'll talk more about what each of those mean. But in essence, all the values that you seek in a cloud-based solution, we are looking to deliver with DR off the cloud. That's number one use case. The second use case is, as I said, single-site vSphere customers don't have a secondary site. That's where our cloud providers come in. Right? So in essence, it's a DR from a vSphere environment to a vCloud director-managed environment. Right? Are these use cases, reasonably understood? Any confusion? Okay. Last but not least, I talked about this aspect of simplicity that we need to bring to DR, right? And when we talk about the cloud, it's all about simplicity. We are talking about this new profile called the cloud customer profile, who is probably a IT business analyst looking to deploy a service, or probably a developer who wants to be in the cloud and deploy a VM or maybe just a database service, right? So we want to make consumption of DR very simple for even this guy who doesn't even know what DR is. So these are the three main goals that we are looking to target. I talked a little bit about who these target customers are. In essence, to summarize, single-site vSphere customers, public cloud providers who, if you choose to move your workloads to public clouds, Hosting.com is an example of public cloud service providers who will offer either DR as a service within their vCloud environment using SRM5, or they may have a larger portfolio of cloud-based services that include DR. And in essence, if you are a customer who is building your own private cloud, you will be able to leverage both of the use cases depending on what your consumption and provider model, subscriber and provider model is. When we talk about Cloud DR, there are four key stages of the lifecycle that we consider. The very first one is actually deploying the infrastructure for Cloud DR, which, as you know, requires a lot of moving components to be configured correctly. That includes having two sites, having at least two sites, having storage configured, having the right networking configured, having the right ESX, the right hosts in place so that you have enough compute and other capacity to handle workloads as they move back and forth between the cloud-based sites. The second stage is once your DR infrastructure has been set up, the provider or the consumer will be associating workloads to be DR protected into today what we call as protection groups. But in essence, you are identifying which VMs will be now protected in the cloud. The third scenario is about once your Cloud DR environment has been completely configured, what kind of DR actions would you call? DR testing, true DR failovers, planned migration, you name it. All of them appear in the stage. Last but not least, there is this aspect of operations management for the cloud infrastructure. You need to be able to know how your cloud DR infrastructure is, whether it's green, it's red, it's healthy, not healthy, replication working, storage working, all elements of that. And in all of this, there are three primary actors we are focusing the solution around. One is the provider admin who builds the infrastructure, who provides the services, right? And if you're familiar with the vCloud director, this is one of the roles that already exist. Also think of the vSphere admin. A vSphere admin who manages his own infrastructure is also the provider of his infrastructure. Secondly, there's the org admin, who when operating in a cloud environment is usually the consumer of a cloud service, but is typically the administrative contact of the customer. Now, when the vSphere admin has workloads running on his site, let's say site A or the protection site, he can be called as the provider admin. But the moment he fails over his workloads into a cloud, he is the org admin because someone else is providing that infrastructure. Make sense? Last but not least, there is the end user, who I said can be the business analyst, can be the application owner, you name it. And we are trying to build a solution that is flexible enough to allow either of these roles to trigger or to participate in any of these life cycle stages, depending on what the provider allows you to do. Let me kind of give you a little bit of a deep dive into what we envision the solution to look like. How is this going to be delivered and consumed? So consider a vSphere admin with a single site who wants to do DR, and he's decided that he's going to go with a cloud provider of his choice. Let's say, for example, hosting.com. The first thing he's going to do is he's going to subscribe from the cloud provider for a DR as a service. At that point, the cloud DR provider is going to provision a org VDC. An org VDC is a virtual data center in the vCloud domain, for those of you who are not very familiar with vCloud Director. And what this org VDC will essentially serve is as a dedicated DR container for this specific customer. So in essence, think of a cluster or a data center in the vSphere or vCenter inventory mapping to this org VDC. Similar to what you have with SRM today, wherein you have site A, site B, think of site A and org VDC. Once this has been configured, how does the end user consume this as a service and manage it on its own? So in essence, once the org VDC has been configured and the subscriber has been registered, what he gets is a activation email probably, or some sort of a notification saying you have been activated. This is the link where you go download the software. And the software is nothing but just a piece of plugin that fits within the vSphere client. So the customer, the vSphere admin, has a single pane of glass for managing DR along with the rest of its infrastructure, even though DR infrastructure is in the cloud. Now, the end customer, the vSphere admin, doesn't necessarily need to do any heavy-duty configuration around DR. All of the configuration is actually captured in a configuration file that gets delivered by the service provider as part of the activation. And as part of the simplistic installation of the vSphere client plugin, they would be importing this configuration file. And what they would end up with is a fully configured cloud DR infrastructure. At which point, the vSphere admin, all he needs to do is select which VMs need to be added to DR protection in the cloud. And once that is done, all he or she would do is test the DR plan in the cloud. Last but not least, whenever the need arises, or if the need arises, this person should be able to even trigger a failover if the provider admin enables the vSphere admin to. As I said, all of this is very customizable. Everything is based on role-based access and permissions and privileges. So this is kind of the simplistic consumption experience we want to provide as part of Cloud DR. Now, for the other use case, which is for an existing cloud, workloads are running in production in the cloud. How does one obtain DR as a service? In this case, the expectation is that the cloud service provider, whether it's a private cloud or a public cloud, would have built the DR infrastructure so that when the customer comes in and creates an org VDC or request for an org VDC, they would now be able to select DR as a catalog service amongst the other services for this org VDC. So the customer may end up with maybe a few org VDCs that are DR enabled and a few org VDCs that are not. So when the end customer, let's say the business analyst, comes in and says, I want to deploy a VApp, the end user can just enable DR, a checkbox for DR similar to VMware HA, and select the appropriate service level. And at that point, depending on the service level, if DR is enabled, that VApp will get automatically placed and deployed on the right org VDC, which is DR enabled, and that can facilitate or accommodate service levels that the business analyst has chosen. So in essence, as you can see, it's a very, very simplistic deployment model and a consumption model, both for the consumer of the service as well as for the provider of the service. Because everything is SLA-based, everything is service level centric. Right? The key benefits we want to deliver as part of this are lower cost of DR per VM. How is this being achieved? So it's not that DR as a service is a really new concept. There are service providers who are providing DR as a service, but the cost of providing that service today is very high, primarily because they need to dedicate virtual center servers, SRM servers, basically the entire DR infrastructure for each customer. Now, that is not a very scalable model. And that essentially, because it's so dedicated, the provider's cost of providing that infrastructure is high. And guess where those costs are going to be relayed upon? It's going to come back to you, the customer. But in a cloud DR model, because we are building a multi-tenant cloud DR architecture, there is no more going to be a need for dedicated VCs, dedicated SRM. In essence, the cost for the provider to offer cloud DR as a service is going to go down drastically. And that essentially is going to help you guys because the cost per VM for DR is going to go down as well, which means if you have any budgets today for DR and you're using DR as a service, guess what? You have enough remaining budget at that point to add additional workloads to be now DR protected, even if those are tier 2 or tier 3, if there is a need for it. And it's not just about the CapEx costs. When you talk about dedicated infrastructure, let's say 100 customers a service provider has at least 100 customers. So if you have 100 instances of SRM services, or let's say if you have a private cloud and you are trying to offer a shared recovery service, if you have tens or hundreds of sites and you're trying to provide that level or that scale of cloud infrastructure, then it's really hard to manage that. So there are operational costs as well as capacity costs, and all of these will be addressed as part of this cloud DR framework. Lower RTO is something that we are constantly focusing on optimizing, and if you have heard about the keynote about the networking improvements such as VXLAN, we are looking to tie into those so that you no longer have to re-IP your workloads when you recover at the DR site. In essence, as I said, simplification is key. We want to reduce complexity of DR. And last but not least, at least in the cloud DR conceptual or visionary side, I want to leave you guys with this chart, which essentially talks about some of the key characteristics of the cloud DR solution. The first one is VM level granularity of both protection and recovery. What that means is that you can not only configure individual VApps or VMs to be DR protected, but you can also recover them at that granularity. Today, when you look at SRM that relies on array-based replication, protection is at the VM level, but recovery is at the LUN level just because that's how arrays are replicated. That's the smallest granularity you can get to in today's model. And we want to go to a model wherein it's much, much more granular. VApps should be able to be recovered individually in a consistent manner. I talked about multi-tenancy. So there are multi-tenancy dimensions around storage, which means you want to isolate storage across multiple customers. You want to isolate your networks. You want to isolate any sort of management constructs, such as whether it's recovery plans, whether those are configurations of the cloud DR infrastructure. Self-serviceability, I talked about, right? You should be able to specify who can do what, who can trigger what actions, who can see what in this framework. And it's really up to the provider admin to specify which of these roles, which of these actions do you want to enable for each of these actors. And all of this is using role-based management. The storage agnostic value prop is, or characteristic is facilitated by vSphere replication, where it doesn't matter what storage, what site, we will help move it. VM portability is about making sure that an encapsulated VM or a VApp, no matter which site it goes to, doesn't need to be reconstructed. I talked about IP customization being necessary today because your IP pool between your protection site and a DR site might be different. And the only way for you to actually recover that workload is to customize the IP, give it a different IP. But leveraging technology such as VXLAN, we are able to now provide you, we are able to stretch your networks between sites so that you don't need to change IP. So that's one of the dimensions of VM portability we are looking to provide. And in essence, when you talk about cloud, you talk about scale as well. So this will be designed to be a highly scalable solution, a scale-out solution, if you may, and will have extensibility enablements for you to plug in any additional DR frameworks on top of what we would provide as part of the core capabilities. Security, we don't take it lightly. As I said, with multi-tenancy, you have pretty good security across the network, across the storage. We're also looking at things such as leveraging VMDK encryption, encrypted traffic across the network pipes between the sites. All of those are in consideration in terms of between security and multi-tenancy. And in essence, if you're going to be providing cloud DR as a service, or the cloud provider is going to be providing DR as a service, you want to make sure that this solution is highly scalable, reliable, and it's easy for you or the provider to troubleshoot any issues that come about. So this in general is the broader concept of where we are kind of pushing SRM towards. And if you have any specific feedback around how you would like to use this model, or if you think we are smoking something, right, just come and let me know. All right. With that, I'm going to hand this over to Craig, who's going to talk about how they're using SRM 5 today to offer a cloud-based DR service.
Great. Thank you, Ashwin. Can you hear me in the back? Great. So on Monday when we did this session, I told the audience that I was excited for two reasons. One was I thought this is a real game changer. Having been in the disaster recovery business for over 10 years through my career, I see this fundamentally changing the economics of delivering high availability to a disaster recovery audience. The second reason why I'm happy is that as a CTO of a mid-sized business, I actually see us using this ourselves, running our core mission-critical applications on this platform. As an organization, we do believe in eating our own dog food, and this is one of the best examples of that we've developed in conjunction with a partner in the last 2.5 years. But since then, I've discovered a third reason why I'm excited. I've been talking to people for the last 3 days, or 2 days since we did our first session, and I cannot believe the number of use cases that I've already heard about for using this technology, things that completely caught me by surprise. So I believe there's a very significant opportunity for early adoption of this technology, and I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about how we're adopting SRM 5. I'm also going to talk about, initially, about some common misconceptions that may affect your ability to make the business case to deploy this sort of technology. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about hosting.com. And I'm going to finish on time, which we're doing much better today.
Yeah, I know.
So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about 3 misconceptions that are very prevalent in the disaster recovery industry. The first one is this notion of the majority of disasters are caused by catastrophic events. Clearly, with what's happened on the East Coast over the last few weeks with an earthquake and a hurricane, we understand what a catastrophic event looks like. But something that I've found over my career is that two things really are not to take into account. One is they occur much less frequently than what we think. And when they do occur, the large majority of the people affected by them, or if you're, say, for instance, you're a service provider or you're selling something online and you're affected by a power outage that affects the whole Northeast. Some of you might remember that. The reality is that when that power outage occurred, while commerce certainly stopped, you didn't change providers. You didn't go and buy something somewhere else. You typically waited because you had empathy for your vendor. However, if the same thing had occurred and it was isolated to one particular vendor, and only one organization was affected, either because of a power failure or a network failure or a fat finger takes out a system of some sort, what happens is no one knows what's gone on, and you tend to lack empathy for your vendor. And if the vendor's not able to satisfy you, you tend to go somewhere else quickly and look for another option. So what we found is that while catastrophic disasters, are certainly, everyone understands what they are, and they're frightening, and they're very destructive, the reality is they don't affect business anywhere near as much as what we call the clinical disaster, which is just almost 3/4 of all disasters are clinical in nature. The worst thing about clinical disasters is no one ever wants to talk about them. The second misconception is with regard to the cost of downtime. So it's very easy to capture what we call the direct costs of an outage or a failure of some sort. And when you're building a business case for high availability, you certainly want to look for these sorts of costs, because the reality is high availability historically has cost a lot more than traditional disaster recovery that's provided by several traditional disaster recovery vendors. So while you've certainly got direct costs such as employee productivity, which some would argue is still an indirect cost, you've got the direct loss of sales and the corresponding profit with that revenue, and then you've got the time and effort required to recover. Those costs only make up 1/3 of the overall cost of executing a recovery from a disaster. The indirect costs, which while they are harder to quantify, they are very real, especially if you're talking about an online product or service. You've got the issue of reputation to deal with. If you work in a compliance-centric industry, whether it's HIPAA, PCI, any number of the financial regulatory systems that are in place, you do have to deal with issues such as fines if you fall out of compliance. I've met many organizations over the years that had a full intention of no longer being compliant in a post-disaster scenario. That is no longer acceptable. Most auditors and certainly certification agencies will not tolerate going out of compliance post-disaster. So those are fees that you may end up paying. And then you've got the issue of data value. What I've seen through my experience is that the most important data to the company is typically the data that you've received in the last 24 hours. Clearly that's not your entire business, but that's typically orders that have not been fulfilled, emails that have not been replied to, or some other sort of transaction that's incomplete. And that data is virtually impossible to replace with a traditional disaster recovery because you're working from backups that are a day old. The third misconception is that not all disaster recovery plans are created equal, or so that all disaster recovery plans are created equal. Historically, when organizations plan for disasters, you allocate a lump sum budget that's attributable to the overall IT spend. And the best practice, if you will, from history is that I take that money and I apply it across all my systems. Because the reality is someone cares about every system I offer or every system I have in place. But what you find when you start to peel back the layers of the onion is that only about 1/3 to just slightly more than 1/3 of applications are really mission critical to the organization. I think of mission critical as being things that keep your customers happy and keep the money flowing. Those are mission critical applications to me. And what has happened with traditional recovery, because budgets are typically suppressed and they're usually cut, disaster recovery budgets are the first things to be cut, people end up applying blanket coverage across the organization. And what we see with tools like SRM5 really being a completely new approach to delivering high availability, we can now start to craft disaster recovery plans to satisfy the mission-critical applications while still achieving disaster recovery for traditional apps. We do not have to apply blanket coverage any longer. We can now get creative. Just some quick background on hosting.com and why we chose to work with VMware with the SRM5. We've been working with the code for some time, and we're looking forward to making our official release in the near future. We focus on high availability. We like to deliver always-on applications to our clients, and clearly if we're going to be in this business, we need to be cost-effective, and we need to be responsive to customer demand. We like to focus on delivering a continuum of recovery services. And frankly, the reality is we're missing an opportunity in the marketplace when we can't offer per VM recovery on our cloud. We've been in the cloud business for over 2.5 years. And this, as far as I'm concerned, is the absolute best use case that we've ever seen for the cloud. There's lots of talk out there about where to move workload and those sorts of things. But talk about, as far as I'm concerned, it's a no-brainer to use the cloud. And this is perfect workload to move to the cloud. The third point about speed of provisioning, we are a highly automated service provider. And with SRM, we were able to take advantage of APIs that are exposed in the tool so that we can actually integrate. I'm going to walk through some screenshots in a minute to show you how we've done that. But this really allows us to continue our focus on speed of provisioning, which translates into two things. One is it'll save you professional service dollars, and it will certainly make it easier to establish highly available services without going through very long planning cycles and execution of those. And the fourth one is cost alignment. By virtue of being a service provider, we deliver services on a monthly basis, meaning that when you no longer need the services, you can change those services or you can discontinue those services. And we have always focused on aligning our customers' cost models with our own service delivery models. And by virtue of working with VMware and leveraging the service provider relationship we have, we've been able to extend that sort of functionality. Ultimately, we focus on reducing risk, reducing cost, and accelerating delivery. A couple things that I think you should take away as a consideration for disaster preparedness. The business impact analysis. This is a very, very long-standing approach to understanding what the risks are in an organization. One of the things that I'm excited about with utilization of SRM, especially in our cloud environment, is that while I can still make sure our customers focus on the cost of downtime, I don't need to spend 3 months talking to people about it because I can implement something so fast that I can actually use what the customer already knows to be true, and that is, what is your level of tolerance for an outage? What applications can you not be without? And we can actually satisfy those needs. The second point is this notion of, do you actually have a disaster recovery plan? I'm sure if I asked for a show of hands, a large number of hands would go up. Most of you that say you have one probably could not recite it by verse. In fact, I'm sure you couldn't recite it. But one of the things that we're able to do with this new service is completely automate what was historically a very manual process. And when you look at a manual process, it can be pages and pages and pages of documentation written by someone who half the time assumes that he or she is going to be the person executing the plan, which is a flawed assumption in the first place. But by virtue of using automated tools and building automation into an online system like what I'm going to show, we can actually reduce the amount of effort required to maintain a disaster recovery plan. And most importantly, testing. By virtue of going with an automated tool, testing becomes trivial compared to the historical experience we have when we go to traditional disaster recovery vendors for testing. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how the technology works. I think Ashton did a great job of that. But I'm going to say that there are two use cases for this service that we've employed. The two use cases are, the first use case is cloud to cloud, so between two hosting.com sites. The second use case is customer prem to our cloud. I'm going to talk, I'm going to walk through some screenshots of a cloud-to-cloud scenario, but in both cases, the technology works the same way. On the left-hand side, you see the production infrastructure, regardless of whether it's at customer premise or one of our own sites. Leverage VMware's vSphere 5, which I think we started deploying, or start deploying next week across our cloud sites. And per VM basis replication, storage agnostic. And at our second location, we replicate data through vSphere and SRM onto an EMC storage array, which we've deployed at all of our data centers. Completely transparent to the end user, certainly, and to the operations personnel. It's a simple, straightforward experience. In the second use case, where it'd be from a customer prem to ours, you still will be using the native SRM interface, so it'll be slightly more complex. But let me walk through some examples now. Before I do that, though, just one quick summary on the real value that we've been able to achieve. First and foremost, compelling recovery times. Our goal is to deliver very cost-effective recovery at an order of magnitude faster than what you would get using any other tape-based or traditional methods of recovery. The testing focus. One of the things to think about is if you test annually but you patch monthly or patch bi-weekly, is there really any point in doing an annual test? Because the next time you do a patch, you cannot guarantee that the test really has any relevancy any longer. So we've designed this service for two things. One is to make testing simple and to make testing automated and to do it quickly. The whole notion of a tiered approach to DR. While we're here talking about SRM, this is our third disaster recovery service. So we actually have two other services. One is a disk-based replication leveraging RecoverPoint, and we also have a host-based replication service that we offer. So this allows us to flesh out our tiers of service offerings to really leverage the cloud. And the last point is portal integration. Our big challenge when we talk to customers, the challenge we keep hearing about is, I don't want to deal with multiple interfaces. I don't want to deal with multiple panes of glass. So we've integrated this tool into our standard portal. So the customer experience is literally two-click deployment. Imagine that, two-click deployment. So just walk through some screenshots. I don't want to risk the demo gods. And since we're still working with beta code, I thought it would be best if we did some screenshots today. So this is an example of our standard login. A customer logs in. The thing to know is it's contextual, meaning that once you log in, you are presented with the way you want your portal to be. So this is just an example of an individual. It has no relevancy to anyone else in the crowd. I think this might actually be Derek's portal, one of the people that works on my team. But once you log in, this is what you would see. The key point here is you'll see a tab in the top left-hand corner referred to as Recovery Services. When you click on that tab, you're presented with two options. One is to review recovery plans. Remember back to what I said about the difficulty of maintaining a disaster recovery plan? Well, now it's online. You can actually go in and view it. And ordering recovery services. When you order a recovery service, it's very straightforward. You literally will select the virtual machine running on our cloud. You will add protection, and then you will watch it go. So I've selected a virtual machine. Now I think I skipped a slide here. Let me go back. It's gone. Okay, so I've selected virtual machine. Now I've brought up some machine details here. You'll see that on the left-hand side where it says recovery status, unprotected. This is a normal VM running on our cloud, any of 4 cloud sites. You'll see on the right-hand side this button that says add recovery. So you'll click on the add recovery button, and it'll go into one more detail. You'll see that there's a server referred to as 6 2s in a row with a 1 on the end. This customer didn't apply a nickname to the server. So it's a device that's running in our Newark data center, and you have one other thing to do, and that is select the recovery site that you want to replicate to. Because we run our cloud across 4 different sites, you're presented with 3 options. You'll select that site, and you'll click Submit. Now you go back to the Virtual Machine Details tab, and you'll see that it now says Protected. That's it. So 2 clicks, and you now have replication running between 2 of our cloud sites. So that's the first use case I talked about. Now, when you go in and look at the recovery details, or you want to see your plans, here's an example of 6 servers that have been configured in the portal. You'll see that there's the 6 that are there. You'll see 3 that are protected, and you'll see actions. So again, very simple. By selecting actions, you see you can initiate a failover, you can initiate a test failover, and you can view the log. Viewing the log, it's great for the auditors. So when the auditors say, did my plans work? You can pull up a log and say, yep, it works, after I've done my test. Or in a post-failure scenario, I need to actually review my logs. The 2 use cases here are, I actually do have a problem, I need to fail over. I'm either going to go into maintenance mode, or I'm trying to evacuate my production data center because I'm concerned about maintenance, or I'm going to do work on some software, and I want to initiate failover. The more typical scenario, though, is I want to initiate test failover, because I actually want to test. Remember I said earlier, if I patch monthly, why don't I test monthly? It's as simple as going into that action tab, selecting initiate test failover, and it will happen. It will test, the failover will occur, you can log into it, you can validate your applications there, your data is intact. Now let's talk about some status. There are 4 statuses that are applied. One is protected, meaning that you're covered. The second, unprotected, means you don't have replication on the virtual machine. The third, recovering, means that failover is actually in progress at this time. And the fourth, unsuccessful failover, I intentionally put that on here because I wanted to reinforce something. Our services are fully managed. So if there's an issue with failover, it's our people that are actually looking at it. This is not something where you have to solve these problems yourselves. And we use the same tool that the customer uses with respect to the portal. Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about. On the right-hand side, you'll see remaining SLA time. Our initial service go-to-market has a recovery point objective, or how much data am I prepared to lose, an SLA of 4 hours. Now, 4 hours is, seems like a very long time. Compared to using tapes from the day before, it's quite quick. Our goal is to reduce that number. There's no reason why we can't. But the reality is customers can replicate over a VPN connection. They can select a VPN between our two sites, or they can select our own inter-site cross-connect service. But if they're using our VPN service or the internet transit that we already provided to them, the reality is they could be out of sync. And you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a server, I think server 5. It says that the SLA remaining time is 3 hours and 11 minutes. That means that we're approximately 49 minutes out of synchronicity on the data. So in the case of a disaster or where you wanted to fail over server 5, you'd lose 49 minutes worth of data. So it's not necessarily, it's a mathematical calculation. You determine how much data you're prepared to lose. So that's a quick summary of that service. Just to reiterate, we're leveraging SRM 5 and vSphere 5 across our footprint between all of our data centers, and any customer that wanted to implement this service from their own environment will need SRM 5 running on top of vSphere 5 as well. So we are looking for beta customers. We've been testing this internally for some time, and we intend to push this service out. So if any of you are interested in participating, we're offering free cloud services and replication between multiple sites for 90 days. So I'm looking for, frankly, I'll take more than 15 customers if you're interested, but we're looking for you to move workload into our cloud, and we're looking for you to work with the product and to give us feedback. So certainly come and see me after the end of the event if you're interested in that. With that, I'll pass it back to Ashwin.
All right, thanks, Craig. Just in closing, I just want you to want to go over some of the key takeaways that I feel you should walk away from this session. The first one is Site Recovery Manager 5.0 complements vSphere to provide the most simplest and reliable DR protection. We believe it's the most comprehensive set of disaster protection that we provide. Secondly, we have extended the core capabilities of Site Recovery Manager to enable disaster recovery for the cloud. And that's essentially what's enabled hosting.com to be able to offer disaster recovery as a service. And last but not least, we encourage you to consider cloud providers based DR as a service, because we believe that's the best way you could have the lowest cost of ownership for any workloads you wish to protect, unless you feel that you're in better control of providing DR for your own environments in your private cloud. With that, I would like to thank you all for attending the session. Again, as I said, this is towards the end. And time for Q&A. If anyone has questions, please step up to the mic or come meet us at the stage. Thank you.
Good job.
All right. We got in time. Yeah.
Maybe we'll do the same thing in Europe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you
Not
there.
a problem. Presumably you're going to be doing, for SMBs to be able to replicate up to your site at some point?
Yes.
So I do a lot of work in medical areas, so I'm very paranoid in a HIPAA way. So how are you going to guarantee that sort of HIPAA compliance and PCI, same thing, because if all the servers I own are in a local office or something, they're safe in network terms. So, but replicating up to your site, how am I going to be able to guarantee that those data are not, that they're on multi-tenant storage and that sort of thing? How are you planning to address that?
So, and keep it at a high level right now, but a couple of different options. One is we already maintain a PCI posture on our production cloud today. So we're applying the same principles to our architecture. But if a customer needed to have more protection than that, we also offer a private cloud service where we would do the same, we would deliver the same functionality but recover onto an isolated private cloud. Mm-hmm. That would be the two ways we would do it. At a disk level, we can provide evidence of segregation of data for any auditor that has that particular requirement. That's probably the 3 high-level things I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Do you do anything to help the initial replication? So if I have like a huge amount of data, like 100 gigs or something like that, like you don't really want me to replicate that over the network, right?
Well, that's a great question.
I can actually answer that. So if you're specifically talking about vSphere replication-based data transfer, then there are a couple of modes. As you said, the first instance of when you replicate, there's going to be a large amount of data that needs to go over. Or you can use the sneakernet approach, wherein you can copy virtual machines offline and then enable it to replicate. At that point, it's going to kind of check the replicated instance on the other side and only sync up the delta.
So you got like an offline mode.
Yes.
Cool.
And we support that as well. Customers today bring virtual machines to us through a variety of sneakernet modes.
And do you have any sort of network compression?
It's not built in, but that's something that we are looking at as part of the roadmap. But you can use the third-party WAN optimizers like Riverbed or other solutions out there.
I have a question. Is there any plan to make SRM VApp aware so that you instead of protecting a single VM per VM, can SRM to protect one VApp?
If I understood your question correctly, you're talking about, so today, SRM is VM-centric. It is protecting per VM. Yes. If I were to translate your question in a different way, are you asking if it's going to be VApp aware or application aware?
Yes. I mean, right now in the vCloud, it's a VApp is a single unit. Inside the VApp, you can have multiple VM.
So VApp is essentially a definition of a application or a service, and we want to be able to protect at that level.
Yes.
That is definitely that's what I thought I alluded to as part of the roadmap.
I see. Thanks.
All right. If there are no more questions, or if you want to talk to us in at the stage or outside, feel free to. Thanks.
Thank you.